So I want you to think about the last time you walked into an interview feeling prepared. You studied the role, you know your resume cold, and you're ready to talk about your projects. And the interview opens with the famous question, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult teammate. And you just stare. Not because you've never dealt with a difficult teammate, it's just nobody ever told you how to package that story in a way that makes an interviewer think, yeah, we need to hire this person immediately. Because you've absolutely handled that situation, you just don't know how to say it. So I've been through multiple behavioral rounds at both Verizon and Apple. Especially at Apple, I did like 6 rounds in a row of just straight behavioral. So I've seen what works and what completely falls apart in the room. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 7 behavioral questions that showed up in my interviews and keep showing up across every software engineering interview that I've ever heard about, internship or full time, that I've personally done, with exact word for word examples of how to answer every single one of them. And I promise you this, by question 3, you are going to realize that you've been answering these completely wrong this entire time. So stick with me and we're going to go through these questions. Some of them you might already know, some of them you might not know. So we'll just go down. So question 1, it's the most famous question of all time. Tell me about yourself. Now, why they ask it is because they want a 60-second pitch that tells them you are worth the next hour of their time, nothing more. So that first question, it kind of sets the tone for how the rest of it will be. If you mess this part up, they will see you differently throughout the entire interview. So an example using start. So if you know from a previous video, I don't use star. I use a method called start. So situation, task, action, result, and takeaway. If you want to know like how to fully incorporate that into each question, check that video out. It's in my channel. But we'll get into an example of how to answer. Tell me about yourself. Right. So you can say something like, I'm a junior CS student who just finished an internship at Verizon where I was on the software engineering team working on internal tooling. My task coming in was to ship 1 feature over the summer. I ended up shipping 2 and started a third by the time the internship ended by front loading the research phase and leaning on my team early instead of going heads down. The result was a return offer, and some of the best feedback that I got was around how quickly I integrated into the team. The takeaway for me was that the speed in the first 2 weeks of any role sets the entire tone, and I carry that into every opportunity I walk into. That's what I'm gonna bring into this role as well. So again, this is just a pure example. It sounds very scripted, but you have to kind of mold it into how you would say it. Like again, so I wrote down this example, right? Something I would say is, "Hey, uh, my name is Bob. I am currently a senior at the University of Texas at Dallas. I've done internships at Verizon and Apple. I've worked on cross-functional teams. I did XYZ. Like, name out some of your projects." And yeah, like you want to end with that note of what you're going to be bringing into the role. Now, what you want to avoid is starting from high school. Bro, do not tell them your whole life story. And listing every class, they don't want to know if you took databases or operating systems. They don't care. Saying that you're a hard worker, nobody cares, and it wastes their time. If you're at that interview, they probably think you're already a hard worker anyways, right? You got to show that through your actions, not through you just saying it. Like, if you say you're a hard worker, they'll take it at face value. But if you say that you had to ship 1 feature and you ship 3 features, they'll be like, damn, that guy's a hard worker. You see the impact? All right, question number 2. Tell me about a time you faced a technical challenge. Now, why they asked it is because they want to know if you can problem solve under pressure and communicate your thinking clearly. So an example using start is, at Verizon, I was 3 weeks into building a feature and I realized the API structure I had designed was going to break an existing integration that 2 other teams depended on. My task was to fix my approach without delaying my own timeline or creating work for those other teams. So I spent about a day mapping out the dependency chain, then went to both teams team leads directly with a proposal for a backwards compatible solution before looping in my manager. The result was we kept the original timeline, and both teams actually thanked me for catching it early. And catching a problem and coming up with a solution is almost always better received than catching a problem and waiting someone else to fix it. Right? So, we just literally went through start, and you see how beautiful, how majestic that answer sounds. So you want to keep sounding majestic like that. All right, question number 3 is, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a teammate. Bro, I've been asked this question like 50 times. I use the same example about a time I had at Verizon where we had we had been working on this like legacy software like system, and I was in charge of like handling like the front end side of it. And I was like younger than the rest of the teammates, so I was wanting to make it more modern. And my teammate, he was a really chill guy, but he wanted it to be a certain way, like a certain structure, but that way looked janky to me. Like it was very like clunky and stuff like that. So, that's like the same example I always use, but I'll give you another example for this video though. And why they ask this is because they're checking if you will be a nightmare to work with. This is a culture fit question disguised as a story prompt, right? So an example of this is, during my internship, there was a disagreement between me and another intern on the approach for a shared component we were both contributing to. We had different opinions on how to structure the state management, and neither of us was obviously wrong. My task was to resolve it without becoming a blocker or creating tension on the team. So I put together a short written comparison of both approaches with trade-offs and asked if we could walk through it together with the senior engineer as a tiebreaker. So we did. We went with the hybrid approach. We shipped it clean, and the result was a feature landed on time with zero rework. Now that brought data. So I brought data to a disagreement instead of just opinions, and it removed the ego from the conversation entirely. And that is something that I now do by default. You see how powerful that last line is? It's insane, right? So by now you should see like how it flows together, right? How from start to finish it flows. Question 4. Tell me about a time you took an initiative. Okay, this one I was asked at a final round interview, and I'm not sure if I bombed it or what, because I answered it like something I did for a project. Like I was working on a project, and the interviewer said, "Oh, no, 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 you don't want to do that. Like tell me when, like you weren't told, like." So when you do get asked this question, just think implicitly they're asking not about a time you took initiative in a project, but a time you did something on your own. So it doesn't have like you weren't told, basically. That part is like implied, and they don't say it in the question. But yeah, that's just how Apple sees it. But for other companies, they might like let you get away with it. But if you want like top tier, that's implied. Now, why they ask it is they want to know if you need to be managed or if you move on your own, right? And initiative is one of the highest signals for return offers and full-time conversions as well. So here's an example using Start. Halfway through my internship at Verizon, I noticed that our team had no documentation for the onboarding process for new engineers. Every new person was spending their first week asking the same questions in Slack. Nobody asked me to fix this, but my task I set for myself was to build something that would cut that ramp up time. So I spent 3 evenings putting together a structured onboarding doc with environment setup, common gotchas, and the links to the internal tools that we use most. I shared it with my manager just before publishing, and it got pinned in the team channel, and my manager brought it up specifically at the end of my internship review. And that was one of the best opportunities to stand out. Are So the best opportunities to stand out are usually the ones that nobody assigned you, is what I learned from that. So yeah, like again, you see how clean that flow is. Again, I'm reading off a script here for those examples, but you kind of see like how I'm flowing, and you can do this as well. You can literally write down a script and just memorize that for those types of questions, because I guarantee you like these will come up like 100% of the time. At least one of them will come up 100%. Like I guarantee you in your next behavioral interview, one of these will pop up 100%, like guaranteed. Okay, question five. Tell me about a time you failed or made a mistake. Oh, this one is huge because a lot of people, including me, what I used to do is I literally couldn't figure out like what to say because anything you say, it made you look bad, right? And then I turned it around and I said like something that, improved from. But I'm gonna give you the right answer. So why they ask this is because they're testing self-awareness and whether you own your mistakes or deflect them. This question eliminates more candidates than almost any other question that you'll ever see. So here's an example of start. Now this is a silly example, but you can probably relate it back to your internship, right? My freshman year, I completely ignored the internship recruiting timeline. I did not know the applications for summer internships opened in August, and I started applying in February. By then, most of the roles I wanted were already closed or in the final rounds. My task became to figure out what I missed and making sure that it never happened again. So I spent a week researching the full recruiting cycle, set the calendar reminders for the following August, and started building my resume and skills over that summer. And that following cycle, I applied early, had a strong application ready, and landed my first internship at Verizon. I now know to treat the information gathering as part of the preparation process, not an afterthought. Right. So this is like a silly example that I gave here. So you see, like it doesn't even have to be technical. Like I use start, it looks pretty good. It looks like okay, this guy like yapped so much that even the interviewer will forget the question. Now, uh, when I get this question, here's how I answer it. Like if I were to be asked this question right now, here's what I would do. So tell me about a time you failed, right? Or made a mistake. So what I do is I give the same example. So basically, you can literally copy this example as well. Like not the one that I just said, but the one I'm gonna say. So basically, I was a part of a club and we were working on this feature and we had to, we had a club expo. So I was basically the leader of the like the group or whatever. And in the expo, we had to present um, our like team so that more people would join and help us with our software. And so right before, I wanted to add more features, right? So when I wanted to add more features, the backend broke like right before presenting, and I was committing so much I didn't know like which commit to go back to. So when we presented, it was literally broken, and what we had to do was kind of advertise it to where, oh, we have broken software. So if you want to develop your debugging skills, you can hop on over, right? So it's pretty embarrassing. The whole scenario was pretty embarrassing, but at the end of it, what I learned was you can always learn and bounce back from where you are. So I turned into something that was completely failing. I made it so that, instead of saying, hey, I failed, I didn't get any like software ready to present at the expo, instead, I literally presented the broken software and I spun it around and I said, um, you can help us debug, and this is the thing that we're trying to build, and here's our vision, right? And that kind of shows the interviewer that I bounce back and turn something negative to positive without saying so. So he'll be like, oh yeah, I still failed, but I learned as well. So again, I used like bro level language for this example because I don't want to say like my exact answer, but this is the type of answer that I would say, right? And so question six. So tell me about a time you had to meet a tight deadline. At Verizon, I had a feature that needed to be ready for a demo to a senior stakeholder with less than a week's notice. The feature was about 60% complete. My task was to get it to a presentable and functional state without compromising the code quality. I triaged the remaining work into must have and nice to have, cut everything that was not essential for the demo flow, and worked 2 longer days to get the core experience solid. I also flagged to my manager what was and was not going to be finished, so there was no surprises in the room. The the result was that the demo went well, and the stakeholder actually asked to see it again in 2 weeks, and the remaining work got finished within that window. And that communicating scope early is more valuable than silently overcommitting. And why they ask this question is because engineering in any real company involves pressure and ambiguity. They want to know if you do not fold when the timeline is, if you're on a crunch or it gets very uncomfortable for you. All right, question 4. Or sorry, question 7. Yeah, we're on question 7. Okay, so this one I've been only asked once ever. But it's a question that they ask at the very end if you're in like a very, very, very final round, and usually it's with like a director level, and it's why do you want to work here, or like why does this role excite you, something like that. Now they want to know that you pick them specifically and not just because they are a big name. Generic answers here are silently gonna kill you. So here's an example using Start, okay? I've been building in Swift on my own time for about a year, and what I keep running into is how different the development experience is when you control the full hardware and software stack. At Apple, that integration is not a feature, it's an entire philosophy. My task in my career right now is to find an environment where engineering decisions at my level actually connect to something people experience in the real world at scale. Now, the result of that research kept pointing me back to Apple as the place where that is most true. And from everything I have read and heard from engineers inside the company is that the bar is really high and the problems are generally tough. And that's exactly the environment that I want to grow in. See how powerful that last line is, bro? Like, I'm really proud of that answer, okay? And yeah, so there are the 7. And I want to be real with you for a second before you close this video. Most people are going to watch this not along. Maybe they got chips, and then walk right into their next interview and wing it anyway. And then when they're going to wonder why they keep getting rejected on the behavioral round while blaming the technical question or doing like terrible on the lead code part of it. Now, the people who actually get the offers are the ones who write these answers out tonight. By hands or typed, it doesn't matter. But say them out loud, time them. 60 to 90 seconds per answer is the target. But if you go over 2 minutes, that's completely fine. And then you will go over 2 minutes actually if you're telling a story and not just answering a question. And then one more thing. Recruiters and interviewers remember specifics. They forget they forget the general stuff, right? The moment that you leave the room. But every answer you give should have a number, a name, or a real moment or a real result in it. If you can't point to something that's very concrete, the interviewer won't remember either. So you have to be, kind of go out of your own path and make whatever story you're going to tell, make it more dramatic, make it stand out more. And yeah, what is one behavioral question that you dread the most? Drop it in the comments now, and I'll personally tell you how I would answer it. And I read every single one, by the way. And if you did not watch my video on the START framework yet, that is the foundation behind every answer that I just gave you. It's linked right there. And watch that first if any of these felt unclear. Subscribe because next week I'll be handling the technical interview prep, the actual questions I was asked at Apple and Verizon, and how I walk through them in the room. And that one's going to be very, very detailed. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and you guys have a great day.